As I mentioned in the pre-show, or I guess the first segment, we have our special guest on, that one that I was really excited about from The Athletic, Max Olson. I'm just going to say it, behind the scenes, we've had some technical issues. So, Max, what's it like to have you on again? Thanks for being with us.
It is good to be back on the show for a third time in the past 3 minutes. Excited to get this going. And, appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, for the listeners at home, this is the beauty of recorded streaming instead of being live. So,
all good.
Yeah, as I mentioned 3 times before already, we were all at Big 12 Media Day, and we all got to see. I've focused on pronouncing his name right that I forgot his name. Brett Yormark.
Yes, yep.
Yormark. Okay, I focused so much on pronouncing his name correctly that I literally forgot his name before I was about to say it. Anyway, it was our first impressions of him overall as Big 12 commissioner. Max, what were your overall takeaways from Big 12 Media Days and from hearing Brett Yormark speak as commissioner for the first time?
Yeah, I reported out a story when the Big 12 hired Brett Yormark, and my reaction was the same as even a lot of ADs in the conference, of like having to Google his name and be like, who is that, when that news came out that he was going to be the choice. We reported out a story about, kind of his background in pro sports over, 30 plus years, and his career as a CEO, and kind of his rise up the ladder. And just, when you talk to folks around the conference, the message was really that he blew people away in the interviews, just with his energy, his enthusiasm, with his big ideas, with the directions that he wanted to take the Big 12 in, and the conference in general, that just hadn't been done before. And I think you saw all that kind of on display at Media Days and kind of his first public appearance. This is a guy that, he has in declaring the Big 12 is open for business, he clearly is going to go about this his own way. And they made a hire that's probably the opposite of Bob Bowlesby in a lot of ways, because they feel like that's where college sports is heading. It's increasingly professionalized, and they feel like they need someone with a pro sports background from, working in NASCAR, from working in NBA organizations and running the Nets, and everything he did in Brooklyn. They feel like they need someone to kind of hold their hand through all that, who has a different kind of experience than, a lot of these career, AD types did. And so I think that the enthusiasm is on display. Some of the buzzwords he threw out about making the, Big 12 younger and hipper, I'm fascinated to see what that actually looks like. But, clearly Brett Yormark is bringing a lot of energy, a lot of juice to this. And obviously, steps in a time when there's an opportunity potentially to raid the Pac-12, and I think he's a guy that's pretty excited about that opportunity.
Max, Mike Craven here. I'm curious, are you optimistic or pessimistic that the Big 12 can remain an important part of the national football landscape? Just with the conference realignment, with Yormark coming on, like, what are your just kind of overall thoughts on how they keep up, I suppose?
Yeah, it's pretty clear where this is all heading. That first of all, obviously money is driving all the decisions right now. And, because of the new TV deals coming up, the SEC and the Big Ten are going to run away from the other 3 conferences. That's just clear. That's just where this is going. And so, the Big 12 is brought in a new commissioner at a time when they need to figure out a way to keep up by any means. And that's not just in moving forward without Texas and Oklahoma and just sort of the hit that you take on that. But then how do they just, bottom line, maximize revenue, maximize the annual distribution to their members? Because it really is all about that to a lot of folks. And so, the 4 new members, I think, are probably the best they could have done in terms of adding new schools. There's not, unless you get Notre Dame or something, like, there's not an Oklahoma or a Texas out there that you can get that makes the Big 12 what it was. But, right now I think you have to kind of look at their challenge here as not so much, what, I don't think there's a bunch of moves you can make that suddenly you're making as much money as the Big 10. But right now, I think the rat race here is how do you get ahead of the ACC and the Pac-12, and that's where, this opportunity to take 4 or 6 schools from the Pac-12, that's kind of the motivation there, I think, is to, basically it's a eat or be eaten time right now, and you have to kind of embrace that and try to make those moves. And whether he can pull that off, I'm really not sure as of today. But that's where the struggle is for the Big 12 is how can you be, you've got to figure out a way to make as much money as at least those two leagues and stay competitive with them.
If you're the Big 12, how do you go about this Texas-Oklahoma departure with these new schools coming in next year? Do you try to expedite it up and get them out of here by 2023 so you can just kind of be, your full-fledged conference you're going to be for the rest of the time, or, rest of the time, whatever that means in college football these days? Or do you, as the Big 12, try to keep Texas and Oklahoma in it as long as, their contract says until they pay up? If you're the Big 12, kind of how do you go about that split?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's where the leadership change, I think, is an interesting dynamic and all that too, because Bob Bowlesby's position was pretty well established. That to him the cost was much more than $80 million, or whatever the associated buyout costs are, because there is the grant of rights, and they have looked into it. They've had expensive lawyers look it over for them and everything, and they trust that it is ironclad and it would hold up if there was any, suits or anything like that. And so, they really believe that they've got Texas and Oklahoma locked in until 2025. And so they have no really motivation to budge on that. Certainly their revenue distribution was really good this year and will keep going up, especially with those schools in the conference. And so it would take the cost would be pretty extreme to be willing to let them go. Now, we don't really know where Oklahoma and Texas stand on this. They've intentionally been really silent about their intentions on, when they want to leave, and are they going to give notice at the end of this year and try and, make that change in 23 or 24. We don't totally kind of know what their end game is here, but I thought that the comments from Yormark at Media Days were curious, because he said, in trying to make these deals, he looks for a win-win situation. Obviously, the win-win here would be the Big 12 getting as much money as possible from them, and Texas and Oklahoma getting out as soon as they want. Now, to me, I think it's probably not just as simple as those guys sitting across from each other at a table and haggling over a number. I think probably in some ways with all this is kind of interconnected, and I feel like I've talked to some folks who believe maybe there's a way that ESPN intervenes in all this and kind of makes the money right for everybody. Could some third party like that kind of step in and help make that happen? I'd be curious to see, because ESPN would be motivated to get them over to the SEC in time for that TV contract, and there's stuff that they need to work out with LHN and all that. So I don't know if it's as simple as just, we've given our notice and we're out of here, and we'll pay whatever we got to pay. I think it's going to be a really interesting process going forward here, and hard to predict kind of when they would get out. I don't think they're going to be in the SEC next year, but with a change in commissioners, maybe it's a very different conversation now.
When we do get to that time when Oklahoma and Texas get out of the Big 12, who do you kind of see, or which teams, maybe not just one, but two or three teams, kind of emerge as kind of the power brokers of that new look Big 12, with the power vacuum kind of taking Texas and Oklahoma out of there?
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty fun league, and I think the parity is going to be pretty crazy, because it's when you take, you guys know, from a recruiting standpoint, Texas and Oklahoma are the only schools in the Big 12 that recruit at a top 10 level and are even capable of recruiting at a top 10 level, if we're being honest here. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like everybody in the new Big 12 is kind of playing by the same salary cap. Everyone is going to, there's going to be some that recruit better than others, but generally speaking, these are all programs that need to win on evaluation and development and really good coaching and stability. And so, I think Oklahoma State obviously is well positioned overall in terms of their investment and the what Mike Gundy has done over his long tenure there. Now, he's not going to coach there forever, and what's kind of the succession plan after that obviously is a question. You're seeing right now Texas Tech is really wanting to invest as much as they can in this opportunity, feeling we can kind of rally everybody around Joey McGuire and spend a ton of money, and the NIL program they're doing, I think, is going to get a lot of players' attention, and you see them trying to make a push here. I think Baylor's obviously super well positioned, and for what they've done over the last decade with 3 different head coaches kind of proves that they can kind of get it done no matter what it looks like. But I think really the 4 new schools coming in, a decade from now, wouldn't you say it's like pretty possible that Cincinnati and Houston and UCF and BYU are, maybe among those 5 or 6 most successful programs in the Big 12 over the next decade? Like, I think that's really possible. Like, I think when you take those programs and you give them more money and a bigger platform and bigger games and stuff, like as we've seen with TCU in the Big 12 or Utah in the Pac-12 or any other example, like I think you have a chance there to really kind of level up. And I think some of these schools are already recruiting at as good a level as Big 12 programs. So with that boost of being in that conference, like I think it's definitely like, is it possible Houston's one of the most powerful Big 12 programs 5-10 years from now? Like, I think that's totally possible.
Yeah, I agree with 100%. I think there is this 10-year outlook where Houston and Cincinnati are dominating the Big 12, and it's like, who let that mouse in the house, type of situation. Just a few quick ones before we let you go. Who do you think wins the SEC first, Texas or Texas A&M?
Oh my goodness, that is a trap. That is a good one. Man. Well, it's funny because we don't really know like how the schedules are going to really work when Texas is in the SEC, and kind of does that make things easier or harder? Right now, obviously, it's really hard to climb up the ladder in the SEC West and get it done. Gosh,
man, I stumped him.
I think today I would take A&M. But I think that I don't know. I think that you could kind of see both programs as well as their recruiting of these past year or these past 2 cycles really. There's still a lot they got to figure out. So I think A&M more likely, and maybe that becomes a little bit easier if they're going to kind of more pod scheduling or whatever going forward. But man, that is. Like, do you guys think that one of them will get it done by the end of the decade?
Yeah, that's a good here's the thing is
because like Saban will be gone at some point, right?
Sure. Right.
Like that's just a fact. So like there's at some point in time that door opens for somebody.
Because here's my thing. Like, A&M has the head start because they've been in the SEC for longer. What I worry about for A&M is this a 400-meter dash where they're just in lane 4 and Texas is in lane 1, and by the time we get to the third curve, that start is gone, right? Does it only take Texas 2 or 3 years to really catch up on that?
Credit to Texas for doing this, but they're recruiting like an SEC team, right? They're building the trenches. They get Sarkisian, right? They're getting an offense that's more friendly to that. We see the Big 12 kind of going outside of Texas, kind of reverting, right? Going defensive, right? You get Dave Aranda. You got obviously Texas looked at Gary Patterson as somebody who knows that coached against that conference. I think they've been preparing for the past year or so for the SEC move. So I don't know if A&M's going to have necessarily that big of a gap on them. They go and get Quinn Ewers, right? Obviously, SEC to win the SEC. I know last year was an anomaly, but you need a quarterback, right? They go try and get that quarterback. I think that's a good point about A&M's gap kind of being a little bit shorter, I think, than we may realize.
It's a fun.
Do you guys think that Jimbo and Sark are both coaching at those schools 5 years from now?
Ooh,
that's a good question.
I think it's more likely that Sark is,
because that
Jimbo,
stability piece is like got to be kind of the huge piece of like, can you actually climb that ladder? Like if can Texas actually break the cycle of firing a guy after 3-4 years because you recruited really well and you kind of built up all this hype and then you didn't deliver on it. Like at least with Jimbo, you've got the long-term contract and he's got all the leverage in that, obviously. But like, I guess there's maybe a little bit more of a bet that Jimbo's going to outlast Sark, I guess would be my thinking today, but that could totally change.
100%. Craven, I see your point on Jimbo because if he has a couple more 8-9 win seasons, right, it starts to become the Kevin Sumlin thing.
When he has no buy-in, he can leave whenever he wants, right? So he could get bored and get a different job.
I will say with Texas though, I think there is a very realistic possibility that they just look south and say we have a guy in the university system that if UTSA has another season like last year in the next decade, which is possible, they just say, why isn't that guy coaching us?
Yeah, I mean, we could get into a whole podcast on like why Jeff Trailer,
I get it, but I think
UT
that's I think that's gonna. I don't want to say that's gonna hurt Sark, but that's something that I could see hurting Sark eventually if they just see a guy recruiting Texas kids, doing it well, winning in the university system, saying, Well, we're just basically reinvesting in our university if we pay the buyout for him.
I'm just excited that we get to have these that
Sure,
Texas
sure.
and Texas A&M are going to be back in the same pool swimming again, and so we don't have to just do this on Twitter all the time. Max, sorry to just kind of
100%.
include you into our podcast there, but
No, trust me, on that topic we can go another hour.
I know, exactly.
Before we get you out of here, just another really easy one just like that. Who do you think has more success at their school, Sonny Dykes at TCU or Joey McGuire at Texas Tech?
Oh, easy questions today.
Oh my God! Wow. I mean, this is the Dave Campbell Texas football podcast, so I can't legally besmirch Joey McGuire on this, can I? I mean, I can't do that.
Well, you could, but he'll come to our office and
Yeah,
show us.
he'll give us.
Well, look, I mean, as you guys have seen over the past week, like with the Brian Carrington cactus stuff, like real. I mean, there's a little more juice to that rivalry than there was a year or two ago. You know, it's pretty fun now, especially in going head to head on guys and recruiting in the state and all that. Like, and who's going to have more success? I mean, I think TCU is set up really well in the new Big 12 if they can kind of develop and retain, because I think they're pretty well established in this state now. I think it's more challenging at Texas Tech, but that doesn't mean I think that it's going to be like it doesn't mean I think that they can't get it done there. I think that's probably the right guy. I love the staff that he's put together there, and he's got to figure out a way to hold on to those guys or replace those guys when he loses them, because he's got some really, really bright young coaches there who've got really bright futures, and so that part of it's going to be huge. Sonny Dykes made some changes on his own staff and taken this job. I don't know if I can pick one today. Like I think it is just objectively harder to do it at Texas Tech. So I think I would lean TCU, but man, the way that everyone's kind of flowing in the same direction at Tech right now, I know that they don't have that same kind of recent history of success, but they're pretty serious now about what's going on in Lubbock. And within a couple of years here, like, yeah, it's harder to get to, but I mean, I think when kids get there in the future, they're going to be pretty impressed by what's going on there. So I think I would lean TCU, but I love what Tech is doing right now.
Okay, and then last one is 2026. Is Dave Aranda still the head coach of the Baylor Bears?
Ooh. This is the hard thing with Dave Aranda when he was at LSU. Like, it was kind of hard to tell, like, where's he trying to get to? Is he trying to be a head coach? What's the move for him? And even last year with I'm sure he heard from quite a few schools about their jobs and probably some of the biggest openings out there. So like, I think he's going to sustain success at Baylor. I think he's going to get more of those phone calls, especially from, I know that maybe some people would take they would maybe take the demeanor and personality and think it's a little different than everybody else. And I think it's different in a great way.
Yep.
I could definitely see him being a guy that stays at Baylor for the long haul, because he's just wired a little different than that. Not to say he's not an ambitious guy, but I mean, what are the jobs out there that he would want to run to? I think that, especially when you come from that experience at LSU, you can see like kind of how quickly, if it's going wrong, how quickly people can kind of turn on you and fire you and stuff like that. So like, I think if you got a good thing going there, just like it was for Matt Rule, I mean, really hard to walk away from it, and it's got to be kind of that dream job you've always kind of wanted. So I think Baylor's going to have an easier time holding on to Aranda, but as we saw in this last cycle, like, you never would expect that Oklahoma would open up. You never would expect that Notre Dame would open. I mean, you just never know which of these jobs kind of come along here. So I think Baylor's going to be able to hold on to him, but you really don't know, what's his ambition in terms of what does he think is the best job out there.
All righty, sir. We really appreciate the time. Thanks for being a good sport on some of those.
Hey, absolutely. Anytime, guys.
All right, there's Max Olson. You can read his work at The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter, Max_Olson. That's Olson with 2 O's for Texas fans trying to holler at him for saying that A&M will win the SEC first. No, Max is great. I'm glad that he was able to have some fun with some of the rapid-fire questions there. Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree. I agree with a lot of what he said. I do want to hint on, before we get to our last topic, there was a reason why teams in the Big 12 were terrified of Houston getting to the Big 12. Do you remember in 2011 when it was like, oh, is this the year, right? When Tom Herman got them going, it was like, is this the year where they make their pitch to the Big 12? And the Big 12 was like, no. Like they were like, absolutely not. Because they never had the Houston, at the time, A&M, obviously Texas, Baylor, Tech, TCU, they had the Houston market to themselves. They had to worry about LSU coming in eventually. But as far as the Big 12 went, they didn't have anybody to deal with in the Houston market. Now you get the flagship school of Houston getting the same amount of money. Obviously,
with
this was
with Fertitta,
yeah,
with a guy
exactly.
who's got money.
Yeah, exactly. And now, obviously, now it was kind of a last ditch effort, right? They needed somebody. They needed kind of a new co-flagship with all of them, right? I don't think anybody's going to necessarily stand out as the Texas or as a Texas or Oklahoma, but they needed somebody to kind of collectively share the burden with. So they finally just hit the emergency glass and said, "Let's bring Houston in." That is fascinating. When you give Houston the same amount of money as Tech and Baylor, what happens?
Who knows?
Right?
Yeah, I think he's right. I think there is this timeline 10 years from now where we look at the Big 12 and go, well, Cincinnati's number 1, Houston's number 2, UCF's number 3, BYU's right there. I really can see that. I think Tech, TCU, Baylor have something to say about that.
Sure.
And if the last question, if Aranda stays there throughout, I mean, I'm betting on wherever Dave Aranda is. I've kind of arrived at that point in my opinions. But yeah, I think those markets that they're bringing in, those teams and programs that they're bringing in, once they have that money and infrastructure of a Big 12 program, can be right there with all those guys, because we don't talk about Ohio enough,
right,
in terms of football recruiting.
Sure.
Yep.
They're right there. I think as Texans, we kind of Texas and everybody else, right?
Yeah.
Even California, Florida get moved in there. But in terms of non huge, it's Georgia and Ohio are the best places for high school football outside of those top 3. And
look at
they're going to be good.
Look at the colleges. You got Ohio State, obviously, as the top. You got Cincinnati. Ohio's consistently been one of the best mid-majors of the last couple of years. Youngstown State has consistently been FCS power. Ohio, you can absolutely
Half
make
that
a
West
living.
Virginia roster is Ohio.
Right, exactly. You can absolutely make a living recruiting the state of Ohio.
Yeah.